Let's say you have a 90-minute commute to work every day. 90 minutes both ways. The national average is 27 minutes each way, so you feel kind of salty about being an outlier, dealing with all this traffic on the turnpike. But then you think, it's just 90 minutes. It's fine. It's no big deal. You just throw on a podcast and drink your coffee. You do this 5 days a week. Later on, you get off work and your eyes are tired. You start the long commute home. More traffic, more podcasts, more time alone with the open road. Really, it's no big deal, you think. Everyone does it. Oh crap, gas is running low again. Better stop on the way. Ugh, why is this guy tailgating me with these headlights? Go around! Go around! I can't go faster than the guy in front of me. What do you want me to do? Oh, I forgot to take the chicken out of the freezer before I left. I'll just get takeout on the way home. Commuting is part of our daily lives, and for most people, it isn't all that long. But no matter the length, the commute itself has become physical and emotional labor for a lot of working motorists, with actual, calculable harm. And I understand this is an overdramatic interpretation. But also, is it? Studies have linked longer commute times to greater instances of mood disorders, to say nothing of what it means for your time and your energy. Let's say your commute actually is 90 minutes, 5 days a week, just for argument's sake. Well, that's 7.5 hours per week times 4.33 weeks in the average month means you're spending 32.5 hours per month commuting. Multiply 7.5 hours of weekly commute time by 50 weeks in a year, just to compensate for things like vacations and sick days, and that's approximately 375 hours per year, divided by the 24 hours in a day, and you spend more than 2 weeks every year just driving to and from work. Over 10 years, you've now spent over a third of a year driving. You're not being paid for this time. In a lot of cases, it's not even being acknowledged by your employers unless factors potentially beyond your control somehow make you late. Things like traffic, weather, road work, things where it doesn't matter if you left early enough to give yourself a nice time cushion. None of that gets factored in, but the gas money, the wear on your vehicle, and the mental labor that begins before you even clock in for the day, all of that gets put on you. And for all of that effort, for all of that fighting the good fight, you get to arrive home completely spent before the living part of life ever gets to happen. Yet nobody really thinks about it because this is just the oblong shape of working life that society has adopted. And so, how did this become the norm? What is commuting doing to us physically and psychologically? And arguably the most important of all, is the daily commute even justifiable today? Or has it outlived its justification?
We can rant if we want to. We can send our best regards, 'cause your friends don't rant, and if they don't rant, then they're not into cars.
The effects of commuting are kind of insidious because they aren't immediate. They're a gradual accumulation like leaves in middle-class gutters. For instance, the most recent data from the US Census Bureau found that the average commute time by car is, again, only about 27 minutes each way, which comes out to approximately 239 hours of commuting each year. Which could honestly be worse, except we end up paying for those hours in one way or another. A 2019 Transport Reviews study found that longer commutes are associated with reduced time spent in social and leisure activities, in addition to reduced sleep time and reduced quality of sleep, which I find really interesting because while commutes are often blamed as a contributing factor in workday exhaustion, I think the implication here is that people don't immediately sleep it off when they get home because they haven't gotten the chance to actually do anything yet, like spend any time with their loved ones or just relax. And so, yeah, I'm tired, but I'm not going to go to bed because I haven't gotten to do anything. I'm going to stay up because I want to try and get something out of this time that actually belongs to me. And I find that poignant, but also deeply sad, particularly since a lot of jobs don't really pay as much as they should. So all that effort might not even guarantee the maintenance of that normal life, much less create the conditions for a less stressful one. But what about the effect commuting has on our bodies? Well, researchers from the Cooper Institute in Dallas, Texas, and the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri, found that a commute of more than 10 miles each way is linked to higher blood sugar, higher cholesterol levels, and a greater tendency towards depression and anxiety due to how much time commuting is simply compounding a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, think about it. You spend the day seated at a desk and then seated in a car, and then by the time you get home, you're too tired to cook, and so you just get takeout, which is unhealthy, or you're too tired to go to the gym or do anything more complicated than just taking out the trash. And all of this contributes to obesity, which increases medical risk factors. One study in Texas found that the farther participants lived from their jobs, the higher their blood pressure, putting them at greater risk for cardiovascular issues. And while obviously you can argue that correlation is not causation when it comes to adverse health effects, it's not that hard to believe that commuting takes things out of us, both physically and mentally. With that said, there are ways to make a commute healthier, air quotes, but even then, it doesn't really fix the root issue. For instance, studies have found that commuter satisfaction improves when you carpool, presumably because you aren't isolated from positive interaction with other people. But even in those instances, it's not as if the commute suddenly becomes stress-free. You're still dealing with traffic and road conditions and other drivers and the anxiety inducing time crunch caused by packed roadways. And the Transport Review's study found that all of that stress risks spilling over into how you feel and how you perform while you're at work. And poor performance at work could affect your earning potential if you end up losing that job or getting demoted. Do people actually get demoted anymore? I always feel like I never hear about people getting demoted. It's just they get fired. I imagine it still happens in the military, but either way, this is just one of several ways commuting can hurt your pocketbook. A 2025 report by Bloomberg notes that the average US household spends approximately $13,000 on transportation every year, meaning things like gas, car payments, and car maintenance. And those costs deepen the longer the commute gets, because you're using more gas, you're putting more wear on the car, stuff like that. And I imagine it's worse in households with multiple commuters, which I'd assume is most households, because if mom and dad are both working and maybe sometimes the teenagers have gotten part-time jobs, everybody is commuting. It's gotten to the point where transportation costs now account for about 17% of household income in the United States, as opposed to the European Union, where it's around 11%. So, in total, commuting leaves us with less time for ourselves, less time for our loved ones. It leaves us more tired, stressed, and unhealthy, and with less money in our pockets. And so I have to ask, how did we even get here in the first place? The reason for the commuter crisis is a three-headed dog of transportation history, a Cerberus guarding the underworld of our daily commute. And it all starts at a pretty obvious origin point: cars. At the turn of the century, cars were a kind of luxury item. The average person had streetcars, trolleys, horses, horse-drawn carriages and wagons, trains, bicycles, and their own 2 feet. A lot of options, but arguably none as convenient as an automobile. But as the first decades of the 20th century progressed, cars were being purchased in growing numbers, so that by the mid 1930s, there was approximately one registered car for every 2 households. It's somewhat overstated how far out of reach cars were for the average American family. Even before the 1929 stock market crash nuked the economy from orbit, cars like the Ford Model T were built with affordability in mind. Now, while it's true that cars were pretty expensive at the turn of the century, this kind of evened out as mass production standardized and installment plans were implemented to make cars more attainable. For instance, GM created the General Motors Acceptance Corporation for the expressed purpose of providing financing for their cars. Because there's no more valued customer than one who pays interest. But while the popularity of cars is a contributing factor to the commuter crisis, it's only one aspect. The second is a 15-letter word: suburbanization. Following World War II, more and more families were moving out into the suburbs as these communities grew faster than a Harley rider's unchecked ego. You see, loans insured through the U.S. Federal Housing Administration and offered by the Department of Veterans Affairs provided financial incentives to developers building on bigger patches of suburban land, as well as more favorable terms to veterans returning home from the war. The incentive was for purchasing a detached, single-family home on these tracts of land. And for both developer and homeowner, it proved to be cheaper to build outward and away rather than closer to metropolitan areas. And this ended up moving families away from cities and into a growing suburban landscape. But to make matters worse, zoning laws were put into place to preserve housing values and overall marketability by steering investment away from urban neighborhoods and toward these new suburbs, which is discriminatory at best and actively bigoted at worst, since federal redlining policies and restrictive zoning laws often denied non-white citizens from accessing these low-interest, government-backed mortgages. But another effect of these zoning laws was that residential and commercial properties were prohibited from sharing the same building, so no bodegas or cafes with apartments on top. And they also prohibited certain commercial buildings from being on the same block as residential buildings, and even prevented things like duplexes and triplexes in suburban areas. So you had a bunch of suburbs now with nothing in close proximity. Naturally, suburban towns would eventually build their own restaurants and grocery stores so that residents didn't need to go into the city for every little thing. But the same couldn't be said for every office building, every factory, or every bank, or every hospital. Simply put, suburban communities didn't compensate for their distance from major employment centers by actually building any of their own. So commutes lengthened as people sought jobs in the city, or wherever the jobs actually were. Basically, in a rush to create a segregated little suburbia, these communities were suddenly isolated from centers of business, commerce, industry, and employment. Play stupid games, and the stupid prizes get passed down through the generations, I guess. And with people moving farther away from major population centers, we needed a way to connect them. Not just to promote national defense, modernization, and to improve safety with all the new motorists on the road, but also to support economic growth. Enter the third contributing factor to the commuter crisis: the Interstate Highway System. When President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Act of 1956, it provided funding for approximately 41,000 miles of highway. Now, while this can be credited with supporting the economy and fostering a greater sense of national community, the effect of the highway system was to basically apply a 4x multiplier to suburbanization. Because now a greater distance between home and work was justifiable, since distances were more easily traversed. You can justify applying for a job that's farther away, or a company can justify transferring you to a different office or branch that could also be farther away. And now, rather than public transit, tax money was going towards road maintenance and infrastructural development, which reinforces the necessity to invest in cars as a buy-in for participation in society. And as the decades rolled on and cars became the de facto mode of transportation, that standard was reinforced by companies who looked to profit from it. Automakers, real estate firms, big oil, and the average American who began to treat especially long commute times as some kind of badge of honor. Like, oh yeah, I drive 3 hours both ways, bro, I'm never home. My kids don't even know what I look like. And that, my friends, is how we got here. And we've spent the better part of 70 years making it a part of the shape adulthood is supposed to take, all while we're trying to jam ourselves into its ill-fitting hand-me-down trousers. And yes, okay, yeah, long commutes, they are a choice. But it's a choice between different shades of disappointment and frustration. Like a full case of Neapolitan ice cream that's just 3 different kinds of vanilla. Wait, hold up, that actually sounds kind of good. So, okay, that's how we got here. But there's still an unresolved issue we need to address. Is the commute still necessary, or has it outlived its justification? So it's a yes. The answer is yes, right? The rise in remote work proves it, so we shouldn't have to commute anymore. We should be able to work remotely and save on gas, stress, and time, no? Well, not really. It's not nearly as simple as that, because ignoring the fact that not everybody has jobs that are capable of being performed remotely, unless we outsource fast food service to Star Trek food generator machines, there's also the reality that remote work isn't always more beneficial than being in the office. Okay, so there's a 2023 report by Fortune which noted that an in-person worker spends about $863 a month in just commuting and food, whereas a remote worker spends $432 a month. But the report also points out that remote workers have higher electricity and gas bills on average. And even setting that aside, there are more issues at play than just money, and it's an issue to which I can personally attest, and I know Brian can too. And it's that remote work can be just as isolating, if not more so, than even the longest commute. Brian talks about it in one of his first ever journal videos for RCR, but there is a tremendous social isolation when you work primarily from home, provided you don't have roommates or a spouse or kids. Both Brian and I have had entire days where we didn't even use our voice because we never encountered another person to talk to. Commuting sucks, but at least you're going somewhere, right? And people will be where you're going, even if it's just co-workers you don't particularly like all that much. You're not isolated from a greater sense of community. And of course, remote and hybrid workers have the same freedom to go out and talk to people, but a paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that while remote workers saved approximately 2 hours of commute time per week in 2021 and 2022, so in the middle of the remote work revolution, they ended up spending 40% of those time savings just continuing to work. So how much time is really being saved? Yet I have to stress again that it's a complicated subject, because that same study would go on to note that despite some drawbacks, evidence supports remote work as a net positive, not just for the individual, but for the community. For instance, remote work leads to lighter loads on transportation systems, less congestion at peak travel times, and reduced energy consumption and pollution economy wide. There was a time when commuting made all the sense in the world, back when housing was cheaper, cars were more affordable, remote work wasn't an option, and there were fewer roadways to connect us to places of employment. But hardly any of that is true now. Cars and housing are less affordable than ever, and in some cases, you have people choosing to purchase homes that actually lengthen their commute simply because it was all they could afford. We have remote and hybrid work options, but also corporations actively fighting against it with back to office mandates. And roadways? My brother in Christ, we have more roads than most states know how to actually maintain. Yet we still commute anyway, and for a lot of jobs, I feel like it's not even necessary. It's just perpetuated because that's how it's always been done. So has the commute outlived its justification? I would say yes, but only for jobs where remote and hybrid work are a possibility. Commuting used to be representative of not only the access to opportunity, but the potential for economic growth, because it was a small price to pay for everything that hard work could get you. But today, for a lot of people, it's just another stressor on top of a job whose paycheck doesn't travel as far as their grandparents did. And all the driving, all the stress, all the time, all the financial cost, and all of the isolation is not justified by the effects it can have on your health, your relationships, and your own psychological well being. It's true, for some jobs, it unfortunately has to be this way. It's even necessary. There is no remote work option for construction workers, surgeons, personal trainers, I don't know. But I do think the outrage over return to office mandates in jobs where remote work was a proven success just goes to show that commuting feels arbitrary in a lot of different professions. Do copywriters, accountants, hell, even insurance adjusters, do they really need to be in the office? Tech support, customer service. I mean, tons of people commute to work to go sit at a computer anyway, and you're telling me they can't do this from home? Who cares as long as the work gets done correctly and on time? At least with in-person schooling, there's the socialization argument that kids need to learn how to be around other people, and that they generally learn better from in-person teaching, although I'm not sure just how true that is anymore. But what's the argument for adults? Socialization is good, yes, but if my work is as good or better remotely as it is in the office, then I'm happy to give up socializing to save myself the drive. But then that's me. I'm a homebody who mostly just keeps to himself. That's not everybody else. And yet I still feel like commuting has outlived its justification. However, the way society was built has made it all necessary so that the choice is either commute or not work at all in a lot of cases. I guess companies want us to be thankful we haven't all been replaced by computers yet. But then, would computers even be free of having to commute? I suppose data traveling across the cloud is a sort of commute anyway, right? Yeah, that's probably a stretch. Thank you for watching. I would love to hear your commuting stories in the comments. I really do read as many of them as I possibly can, and I like to chat in the comments, so be on the lookout for me. My screen name is Limited Time Roman. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, share the video, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you're notified for every new video. But if RCR brings any sort of value to your week whatsoever, and you want to support us to continue making these videos, join our Patreon for just $1 to get these videos early and ad-free, along with other exclusive content. Merch links are in the description, and for every order from our Fourth Wall store, I'll send you a personalized thank you video. Thanks again for watching, and have an outstanding rest of your week.